Young Turks, drop it. Power panel. J.R. Jackson, Nomi Prince, John Idarola. I'm Cenk Huger. How you doing, Nomi?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome.
Good.
Okay, so we have tons of exciting news for you guys. We are at the turning point. We will explain a little bit later in the program. What do I mean by that? There is two pieces of news today that I think will begin the final countdown. Tick, 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 tick. So, yes, so you can sing along with me, John. Is it Kavanaugh? No, we have a huge story on Kavanaugh, but that is not it. Is it Michael Cohen flipping even more and cooperating with the prosecutors? Yeah, partly, but the biggest story today is Rosenstein. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, and it will likely set off the dominoes. So at some point, there's some chance on the show today we will yell "Domino's mother!" No, okay, probably will not do that. Okay, we also have major news about an interesting thing related to the Young Turks. I'm going to do that in a second. Hold. All right. So first, about today's proceedings. Not only are we doing the show 6 to 8 p.m. as we always do, of course, as you know, but John is going to do double duty today. He's going to host the first hour, then he's going to run over and for the members host the Beto O'Rourke, Ted Cruz debate. So that is happening tonight. It's at 7 o'clock. That's only for the members, live play-by-play coverage with John and Brooke Thomas, okay? You guys are gonna love that. Now here's the thing, you're thinking, but wait a minute, you guys are also on air. What am I supposed to watch? Well, don't worry.
That's obvious.
Okay, I see you. Okay, you're members, so you can watch either one live and the other one later, because obviously members not only get it live, but they get it afterwards as well. So tyt.com/join to become a member and to get that. And I want to do a special thank you and a shout out to dallasnews.com, NBC5 in Dallas for sharing their live stream of the debate. They're sharing it with our national audience, and that is greatly, greatly appreciated. So thank you, NBC5 in Dallas. Yes?
Yeah, so you clarify that, but just to be super clear, if you tune into our stream, not only will you have our commentary, but you'll have the actual stream of the debate as it's going on. We will also be taking member comments and questions live during the actual debate analysis. So if you want to interact with myself or with Brooke, you can do that live while we're doing our breakdown.
So that's in about an hour. And so tyt.com/join to become a member. But then once you're a member, you got to go to tyt.com/memberslive. That's how you watch old school when it's live, post game when it's live, and this debate coverage. So Beto versus Beta begins tonight. Okay, fun for everybody. I want to do an ad about that next week. Okay, so now announcement number 2. This is also important for all of you out there, progressives. You need to participate. So Ben & Jerry's has partnered with MoveOn.org. So this is a super fun partnership. They are going to come up with, no, wrong, you are going to come up with 7 new flavors for wonderfully progressive candidates running for Congress. That's why I love Ben & Jerry's, other than the fact that it's delicious. But Ben Cohen is one of the great heroes of not only the progressive movement, but specifically getting money out of politics. He's done some amazing work for that, and Move On, obviously a huge progressive group. So the endorsed candidates include, and you guys have to come up with innovative flavors for them. And there's a contest. I'm going to tell you about the contest in a second. But the candidates are Jess King, she's a Just Democrat out of Pennsylvania. Amar Kampa-Najjar, a Just Democrat that's been on a power panel with us and interviewed many times. In Duncan Hunter Jr.'s seat there, and so looking forward to those flavors. Lauren Underwood in Illinois, Aftab Purval in Ohio, J.D. Scholten in Iowa, Stephanie Rose Spalding in Colorado, another Just Democrat, and again another person who's been on the power panel here earlier, James Thompson from Kansas 4th District. James is awesome and was on Rebel headquarters just earlier this week. So how are you going to do it? You're going to invent 7 flavors and flavor names. We've already started thinking about them, so I might enter the contest. Okay, John and I are going to get into a beef here over, or an ice cream over who's going to name the flavors better. Anyway.
There's no beef in any of these flavors, just so you know.
But you got to capture the essence of the candidate, obviously. How you enter is go to moveon.org/Ben and Jerry. MoveOn.org/Ben and Jerry. If you're watching this later, as always, we have the links down below in the description box or comment section on YouTube and Facebook. And entries must be received by midnight, basically, on September 28th, 2018. So that's coming up. So put on your thinking hat and get to it. Winners will receive 1 pint of their own custom Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So that's a great, innovative way to help progressives.
Nice.
Thank you, Ben and Jerry's, and move on. Okay, so here's the exciting news about the Young Turks. Now, look, you know we're home of progressives. You know that you're going to go to tyt.com/join to become a member. You know that activist level members get first dibs on tickets to our own events. Now, but this is not one of our own events, but we would like you to show up because I think you're going to enjoy it. This year at Politicon, I will be debating Tucker Carlson. Damn. So that happened.
Oh my God, they got a photo of him making a different facial expression.
Wow.
No, they just shaded it a little bit on one of, yeah.
So you're going to go to, in order to get tickets, it's Sunday, October 21st, obviously, as you can see in that graphic. The whole convention is the 20th and 21st. Anna Kasparian will also be there. Hassan Piker is also going to debate Charlie Kirk again. So a lot of the Young Turks crew will be there throughout. Go to Politicon.com and then enter the promo code TYT. For the people who use that code, we will be communicating with you guys about what we're going to do that weekend. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. Okay, so that ought to be exciting. So make sure you enter the code TYT. Cenk Uygur versus Tucker Carlson. It ought to be interesting. You don't want to miss it.
But it said in conversation.
We are just, that's all we're doing. We're conversating.
Gonna exchange ideas, thoughts and ideas?
Yeah.
No gloves. Gloves off.
The gloves are off.
Yeah.
And I believe the holds have not been barred. They have not been barred. So no holds barred. We'll see how that goes. I will be questioning some of the things he has said. I'm sure he will do likewise. So it'll be an interesting conversation. Okay, looking forward to seeing you guys there. All right, now we got lots of news. Now, like I said, Kavanaugh, Rosenstein, Cohen, huge stories. But yesterday I mentioned to you something that's really important to progressives and how it got under my skin. It does happen from time to time. So I wanted to make sure that I followed up with you guys, and it is about a topic you are familiar with and probably have similar feelings as I do about the frustration that it causes with the mainstream media. Okay, so CNN has consistently been questioning progressives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in particular, about her programs to help American people. That's obviously an outrage. If you do tax cuts for the rich to the tune of trillions of dollars, well, of course we can afford that. Wars for trillions of dollars, well, of course we can afford that. But you want to help somebody get health care in America? How we're going to pay for it? So in fact, let me just show you a couple of quick clips here. We did this earlier with Jake Tapper. Chris Cillizza has done a follow-up that I want to share with you guys and then we'll comment on. But I want to show you the tone of Tapper's questioning and the substance of it as well. So we already shared with you Ocasio-Cortez's responses in an earlier clip. So this is just as a warm-up to Cillizza. Let's remind you Tapper's questions. Let's watch.
According to nonpartisan and left-leaning studies friendly to your cause, including the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities or the Tax Policy Center, the overall price tag is more than $40 trillion in the next decade. You recently said in an interview that increasing taxes on the very wealthy plus an increased corporate tax rate would make $2 trillion over the next 10 years. So where's the other $38 trillion going to come from?
So as we explained to you earlier, that is greatly misleading. First of all, he said from left-leaning think tanks, yes, some of the smaller numbers, the $32 trillion number, which I think is the the great majority of the 40 trillion, if I can do my math right, and I'm pretty sure I can, comes from the Koch-funded study at George Washington University. But he made it seem like, oh no, these are all liberal think tanks that are coming out with it. But more important than that, as we've gone now over several times, that $32 trillion number does not exist on its own. That is the cost of healthcare in the country. And so every proposal would counter that. You would take away some percentage of that money. Now, progressives have shown, and we've shown on this program over and over again, even that Koch-funded study shows you if you actually applied Medicare for all as it currently exists, it would save us $34 trillion. That's the thing that Jake Tapper left out. So that would be a net $2 trillion in savings. And instead of talking about this monstrous $40 trillion number, we'd be talking about obviously a much smaller number, $6 trillion. But even if you thought, hey, you know what, it's not gonna save us $2 trillion, it's gonna cost us $2 trillion, and that's what the conservatives might argue, well, you're still not talking about $40 trillion, you're talking about $10 trillion at that point. So the whole thing is grossly misleading, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez countered by, hey, healthcare, actually, the Medicare for all proposal saves money, a very similar point to the one I'm making right now. But Tapper was not convinced, and at the end of the interview, he ended it this way.
Assuming I'm not going to get an answer for the other $38 trillion.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get an answer for that. Okay, I'm not sure that you wanted that answer, but still, CNN persists. So Chris Cillizza, apparently, progressives' responses to this, I don't know if it got under his skin or they just love this topic so much because they can't wait to show that they're not liberal media by beating up on progressives. And of course, it depends on whether you're right or not. So facts do matter. So let me quote Cillizza here. He said, on Sunday, CNN's Jake Tapper put a very simple question to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. How are you planning to pay for the many and various expensive programs and plans that you are either proposing or support? The New York soon-to-be Congresswoman didn't have any answers, like none, he said. But wait a minute, Chris, she explained for 3 minutes how Medicare for all would save money. Now, I guess you're hanging your hat on, well, she didn't go through the math that Jake Tapper presented. Let us know it, and we looked into this and we asked CNN about it, and we asked some of the groups that they cited. Does this number exist anywhere else, the $40 trillion number that Tapper asked her about right there? And no, it appears that it's CNN's math. They took a number of studies and put them together. So the reason why that's important is because this is the first time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or anyone has ever heard of that number. So you couldn't possibly have prepared ahead of time for this question. So then they say, okay, here's $40 trillion. I put it up in a graphic which you might or might not be able to see as a guest, and I need you to answer it right away. And she gives the best answer she can. Wait a minute, the $32 trillion number actually is not accurate because Medicare for all would save us money. And they go, she had no answers, like none, like none. That's not true, because you're not paying attention because you don't want to pay attention. Yeah. So he goes on, he says, let's buy into Ocasio-Cortez's case that costs would shrink if the government, rather than the free market, ran things. Pause there to note that apparently she did have an answer, okay, not none. So apparently you acknowledge that. He goes on to say, let's even say that it would have the cost of the programs that she supports making the law. That's still $20 trillion, which has to come from somewhere, right? No, Chris, look, it's incredible how smug they are and how condescending they are when they're preposterously wrong. Why would you have the number? That doesn't make any sense. That's a combination of college for all, Medicare for all, and a number of different programs. It's a weird thing to say, let's have the number. No, if you took out Medicare for all, taking out the $32 trillion, you're having a completely different conversation. And by the way, as Tapper pointed out in the beginning, Ocasio-Cortez has said, if you take away the Trump tax cuts, that's another $2 trillion. If you do the speculation tax, that's another $2 trillion. And so on and on, next thing you know, there's actually very little to make up, if you had to quote unquote make up anything. And I can get to the substance of how they're thinking about it wrong in a second. But their math is preposterously wrong. But yet the condescending attitude of like, you don't have any answers. Whereas we made up a bunch of numbers and then we made up having them. And then we claim that you don't have an answer for things that we made up out of whole cloth. So let me give you the rest, and I want everybody to jump in. He goes on to say the truth that Ocasio-Cortez doesn't want to acknowledge is that the only, or at least the most likely way that she fills the gap between cost savings and the actual cost of the programs she's proposing is to raise taxes. Yes, on the wealthy, but also, if we're being honest, on more than just the wealthy, raising taxes is never popular. No, correction, Chris. It is actually quite popular among the American people if you actually looked at the polling. But you don't. Instead, you're in groupthink, and in Washington, all my Republican friends told me raising taxes is not popular. All my rich friends told me that raising taxes is not popular. Look at a poll, Chris. It actually is popular. These tax cuts where they cut taxes to the tune of $2 trillion, at one point I think polled at 17%. Have you ever looked at any polling? So I'm sorry if I'm being condescending, but I believe you started it. Okay, Tapper is doing an important, he says, I love this one. Tapper is doing an important public service here, Cillizza says. Well, we really appreciate it. He's highlighting the difference between campaigning and governing. The truth is that as a candidate, you can be for almost anything because you don't have any responsibility. You aren't in charge of managing the federal budget or reducing our deficit and debt obligations. Free stuff sounds great, but free stuff is almost never free. Oh, look at the condescension dripping from his mouth.
Market.
Yes.
Talking points.
Yes. Oh, free stuff isn't free unless we're giving it to the rich, and then all of a sudden, trillions of dollars materialize out of nowhere. And he concludes with, as Jake's interview made very, very clear, Ocasio-Cortez isn't there yet. And by the way, that's just a little bit of sexism sprinkled in there, like, oh, Ocasio-Cortez, young woman doesn't understand and ageism perhaps, et cetera, doesn't know how to govern. But the most important thing, if you put the sexism, ageism, et cetera aside, is progressives don't know how to govern. But Chris, Jake, did you guys for 1 second ever consider how we're governing today? And I don't mean just under Donald Trump. I mean under your beloved establishment, under your beloved status quo. It's been an absolute disaster. Epic deficit after deficit under Republicans and Democrats. And the tax cuts and the wars and the spending and all those things that never got us any of the results that they promised. Do you remember that the Bush administration in congressional hearings said that the Iraq war would cost $1.7 billion? Instead, it cost several trillion dollars. And did you ever ask them, how dare you? You obviously don't know how to govern. Look at these children in the Bush administration. Child Dick Cheney doesn't know how to govern. A foolish John Bolton doesn't understand anything about money. Did you ever put up a graphic and say, John Bolton, where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the trillions of dollars you wasted? No, never, because you assume the status quo is a great thing. Whereas the rest of the country does not. We think the status quo is a disaster.
Well, I mean, I think, look, obviously going back to the skyrocketing cost of the war effort in Iraq and Afghanistan, that's certainly true, but we don't even need to go back that far. I mean, they just passed a defense budget this week, $673 billion. That's never expressed in the same way. What does that actually mean over the course of a decade? Well, we assume if it doesn't go up, and of course it always goes up, that's $6.7 trillion right there. How are we going to afford it? Some of my favorite free stuff is military stuff, but free stuff isn't free, so how are we going to afford that? They would never ask that question of anyone, Democrat or Republican, lib or conservative, because with certain types of programs, the assumption is that the value is there. If they say we need $700 billion in the actual budget, not including continuing expenses and things like Syria, obviously we need that. We need to have military defense budget levels that are similar to under Vietnam, even though we're not in a war or even close to comparable. If they do the tax cuts, the assumption is that the value is there. Republicans always say that if you cut taxes, that will actually generate more government revenue. So they just assume that that is the case. I didn't hear him going through that list of the programs under the DSA, as he was labeling it, and talking about all the benefits of that. If you cut these student loans, what do you think happens to the money that the people would have been spending on their loans? They'll be spending it on other things, which not only stimulates the economy, but also produces more government revenue. We know that on the opposite way, when you cut people's taxes, people who are already making millions or potentially more each year, they're not then plowing that saved money back into Starbucks and buying cars. They're generally putting the money offshore. So they've got it exactly twisted. Jake Tapper could take that same sort of condescending attitude and make a great career out of applying that same sort of rigorous standard, hopefully attached to the facts, to every politician that comes before him. But he, of course, will not do that. He will do that with libs and probably just young Latina female libs like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He will never take that tone with Steve King or anyone like that.
Mick Mulvaney, Paul Ryan, tax cuts, all these things that happen. They'll criticize Donald Trump. They're talking about somebody who's not ready for prime time. The guy for the entire election talked about all the promises. You can make promises when you're a lib. He brought up, of course, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, he also brought up Andrew Gillum. Just cites to that name in there too, because all these guys who are new to the scene, at least in your mind, it's not like he hasn't been doing anything in Tallahassee for all these years. It's just that, you just heard their name nationally, means they don't know what they're doing. Of course, yes, there's criticism for Donald Trump for his craziness, his over-the-top rhetoric and the way he talks, and the response is always, but he's connecting with the people. It's okay to connect with the people, know the country that you're saying are the heartland of the country, but not for the people who, she's in New York, somebody's in California. All those crazy libs, all they want is handouts. When you see a rich person getting handouts, which they did, and then it all gets siphoned out, we had tariff fights where people are losing jobs. I remember Trump was promising carrier jobs. Harley Davidson's losing. He doesn't know how these things work. They'll point out that that's happening, but they then won't say, and why should we trust him with anything else? They'll just say, hey, he went crazy with that. The next step is, the next thing he says is gonna screw you over too. They'll say that here because I'm telling you, there's something deep down, and it happens with liberals, and Jake Tapper's pretty good on a lot of socially progressive things, I think, from what I've seen. But there's still something inside, even from a lot of liberals, that they see a young woman, a young minority of either gender, and they'll go, I can't see her making legislation that I have to follow. It just doesn't feel good to them. There's still something in the pit of some people's stomachs. They don't like seeing that face do something for the country that they have to then follow.
There might be a thing on women in math too. I mean, I have a degree in math. I've got a graduate degree in statistics. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you mentioned about how we can dig into what Jake Tapper didn't do and think about how this really benefits the economy, whatever the cost is, because a cost is also a reallocation. That's what happened when, for example, the Fed created out of nowhere $4.5 trillion to give to the US banking system, to allow them to be prosperous. Instead of, say, taking a third of that, 1.4 trillion, which is a correct number on Tapper's list, and using it to diffuse the student debt so that when students actually graduate, they can go ahead and pay for things and not have to pay for all their debt. Similar with healthcare. Right now, and that's, I think, where this number came from, we pay, as Americans, $3.4 trillion a year in healthcare. So what that basic study that Tapper chose to use in that interview said, okay, well, 10 times that's 34 trillion, so that's the number, which has nothing to do with anything. First of all, that is a number that includes increases in hospital costs, increases in premiums. It doesn't look at, more importantly, the deflection of any money, whatever the right number is, from paying premiums and paying additional health care and paying from other things that could go into the economy into preserving one's life or one's health. For example, right now, the average family in the United States pays about $8,000 a year in healthcare costs, $5,000 sometimes per individual. If you told everyone you're getting a $5,000 or $8,000 tax cut, in other words, we are reappropriating that money in order for you to actually use that in your pockets so that you can put that into the economy, that looks like a really great gain. And that is a much smaller gain than the $1.5 trillion of tax cuts that went to corporations who only pay for 9% of the federal budget. So all of how we should be looking at the essence of what Alexandria said and what Bernie Sanders says and what progressives say, which is that we need to choose how we grow our economy. Do we grow our economy by funding stuff that doesn't go into the economy but makes GDP look better? Or do we fund the economy by taking things into the economy that can allow its citizens to be healthier and citizens to be more productive economically and raise GDP? Nowhere in any of the conversations that attack what progressives want to do with their spending indicates the increase that happens on the other side of reallocating funds away from helping those that don't need it and reattributing that to people who can use it into the real economy, whether that is after school, whether that is instead of healthcare costs, whether that's to grow businesses, whatever that might be, raise GDP, actually inflate the economy so that as a country, we're not paying 17% of GDP in healthcare costs versus 9% in almost every other developed country, almost more than, basically double. But we're actually increasing GDP and reducing healthcare costs so that we are healthier as a nation and for people.
So I want to make one final comment about their view of the status quo. And look, I agree with JR that they're probably socially liberal. And I've credited Jake Tapper in the past for some good segments, and we try to be fair here. And I'll try even more here. Look, I think you guys might make some good points, and I mentioned it too about, is it their age? Is it that they're new onto the scene, etc. I think it's mainly this is an ironic way of being fair to them, but their disdain for progressives in general, because they show the same disdain to Bernie Sanders. And he's in obviously a different category. And so, but in their worldview, these guys are all outsiders and don't know how to govern. They've thought of Bernie Sanders that way for the last 40 years. To them, he seems like a radical for proposing things that in almost every issue, about 60% or higher of Americans agree with. It is not a radical position. Again, I asked you to look at the polling. I asked you that from the outside because you almost never invite us on the inside. So sometimes you'll talk to Bernie Sanders. You did a 3-minute segment with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then you follow up with, like, progressives can never answer the questions. That's because you don't ask them. You ambushed her with a made-up number and then never followed up with any other progressive other than to keep pounding that they can't answer it, when you don't actually have them on air. Look at the answer Nomi just gave. She's a former managing director of Goldman Sachs, has written a number of best-selling books about these issues. I think there's plenty of progressives to choose from, but somehow CNN never gets them on air. There's wall-to-wall Trump people, there's wall-to-wall Clinton people, but when it comes to progressives, what do they know? Here, ambush them for 3 minutes and then make fun of them for a week afterwards, and don't let them defend themselves. And maybe look, again, I guess I'm gonna sound a little condescending here, but two can play at this game. Maybe they're afraid of the answer. That if we came out there and we made these points, they'd be like, whoa, that's rude, we don't talk about that on air. So for example, JR alluded to, with progressives, they're always saying, oh, you want free stuff, you want free stuff. That's a Republican talking point. Oh, welfare, the welfare queens want stuff. But hey, how come you guys almost never talk about corporate welfare? I mean, an amazing study between 2010 and 2015, the 200 top companies who gave money to politicians gave an astounding $5.8 billion. But you know what they received in return? $4.4 trillion in subsidies. Where's your graphic about that? Oh, right, you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So maybe that's what makes you uncomfortable. And a lot of those people advertise on your air, let's keep it real. And maybe that's why you don't want progressives on air. But the reality is that if there is welfare in this country, people who want free stuff, it's corporate welfare. And they've robbed us to the tune of trillions of dollars. So you'll excuse us that when someone proposes to spend money on the American people, that we get excited by that. Because for the first time, it would be our representatives representing us rather than their corporate donors. Okay, look, I can go on and on at the whole point about cops, but we gotta go because we got a lot of different stories for you guys. We gotta take a quick break here. Then some of the most important things, I believe the dominoes are about to begin with Rosenstein and Cohen, so we'll come back and do that. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you wanna get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks, too many comments here. I'm gonna power through them. Romantic Warrior says, TYT's the bomb, honored to be a member. Thank you, we appreciate it. tyt.com/join, of course, to become a member. Being Plain Jane says, this is a YouTube super chat, says, yes, you're debating Tucker, this is great, should be interesting. Dr. Peppero Doom writes in on Twitter using hashtag TYT Live. The right wing better get those thoughts and prayers ready for Tucker Carlson, he's gonna need them. We'll see, it'll be fun. Chaos Magician 77 says, just convince my Trump supporter parents to support Medicare for all. Whoa, nice. I love that one, that's my favorite comment. Gabby Marita says, anyone fixating on the notion that Medicare for all will cost X while deliberately admitting that it will overall save Y is being intentionally dishonest. And that is a fair point. You have to wonder why they're doing that. And Axia 66, and these are now in the member comments, and we prioritize those, of course, for our members. Could the White House have made up and leaked the Rosenstein info so that they could use it to fire him? Trump Jr. didn't waste a second to attack tweet him. So hold, we're getting to that story, and that is an interesting hypothesis. One last thing, poll results from yesterday. We asked you guys if Christine Blasey Ford should testify in the Kavanaugh hearings. And I was very curious to see which way you guys were gonna go, and the poll's still open at tyt.com/poll. 80% said yes. An animated, spirited case against it, and there's good reasons against it, but 80% want her to testify. Okay.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to watch that.
All right, and oh, by the way, I should mention, if they're happening on Monday, we're gonna cover them live on tyt.com/live. That's for everybody, okay? Members, of course, always get all the content afterwards as well if you miss it live. But those are really, really important hearings. So we'll be here at 10 a.m. Eastern if they're on Monday. If they're on a later day, we will cover it on that day. So we will definitely be covering it live. Make sure you tune into TYT. All right.
Yeah, and to be clear, the entire run of the
the entire day. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Joe.
Let's talk about this actually. There have been any number of people in both media and politics who have stepped up in the past week or so to launch absolutely horrible and worsening attacks against Christine Blasey Ford for having accused Brett Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her several decades ago. But up until this morning, Donald Trump had chosen to mostly sit on the sidelines, which is not really normal for him, especially considering his own dark past in this area of both harassment and assault, and his steadfast support for any man accused of these things, including Rob Porter and all of that. But as of this morning, he is off the sidelines, he's in the game, and here is how he has decided to weigh in on this topic, saying, Judge Brett Kavanaugh is a fine man with an impeccable reputation who is under assault by radical left-wing politicians who don't want to know the answers. They just want to destroy and delay. Facts don't matter. I go through this with them every single day in DC. The interesting thing to remember about that as we proceed to his other tweets is that he says the other side doesn't want to know the facts, so bear that in mind. Second tweet, I have no doubt that if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement authorities by either her or her loving parents. I ask that she bring those filings forward so that we can learn date, time, and place. Again, he wants to learn date, time, and place. He wants the facts in that second tweet. But now we get to the third where he says, the radical left lawyers want the FBI to get involved now. Why didn't someone call the FBI 36 years ago? Well, that's the interesting thing. You seem to desperately want to know what was going on, and then you attack them for involving the FBI, an organization whose job is to find out what is going on. I think that we would all like to understand a little bit more about what is going on right now, but also what happened 36 years ago. He seems to have a very weird, tenuous approach to that. That's just one part of it though. Of course, the thrust of his main argument is that her not willing to go forward to the police when it happened as a 17-year-old should really make you question whether she knows what happened, is remembering it wrong, maybe is making up the entire thing. There's shades of a conspiracy in some of those tweets. This has been described, of course, as slut shaming, also advancing long, many times debunked myths about how sexual assault survivors choose to function and whether we should believe them based on the way that they act. As RAINN made clear, an organization that deals with sexual violence, in reality, 7 out of every 10 victims don't report to the police. And they go on to explain that while 7 out of 10 don't report, of those who do, very, very few, a far smaller fraction, get any sort of justice. All of these things are contributing factors to people not wanting to come forward. And I would now add to that list the fact that the president of the United States, possibly the single most powerful person in the world, is coming out and attacking a victim of sexual assault.
Well, this is a president who tends to pay people off not to talk about things that he imagines not to have happened. So it could be that the method in which Kavanaugh could have handled something that may have happened in his mind would have been how he would have handled it.
Yeah.
So that's all convoluted. The reality is, as you said in those stats, not And proportionally, most victims of any kind of assault don't come through. And they don't come through specifically for the reason that they could be shamed, they might not be heard, they are dealing with it in their own personal way. And in her case, that's what she was doing for all that time. It wasn't like she wasn't potentially stressed, or that she didn't go to therapy, or she didn't have all of the activity around around the past and what happened in her mind and in how she developed her life. But that said, the guy who is the president of the United States, and kudos to him for holding it together for 2 days and not going after her, for him. Yeah. But that is just another in the litany of shameful ways in which he misbehaves. Because the reality is, his job is to say just part of what you just went over. I want to know what happened, and we should continue to determine what happened, as well as what Kavanaugh's other questioning might amount to by the committee as he goes through his hearing. This is a guy who could possibly or not be taking over a major seat for a long time, possibly more than 36 years in the Supreme Court. That's all he should be doing.
Yeah. So let's note a couple of things for the record here. The FBI would not have been able to investigate that crime 36 years ago. It would be local law enforcement. Trump doesn't know that. On the other hand, what does Trump know? And on the other hand, he said just the other day that destroying the FBI would be one of his crowning achievements of his administration. So, and you have to know, this is an important fact, that only the president can ask the FBI to do a further background check in this case. And so he's saying, well, I mean, if only we could know these facts, this, to John's point. Well, there is one way to know them, if you ask the FBI to look into it. Yeah. But if you don't, then yes, then nothing the rest of us can do about it. And
yeah, he doesn't want to set a precedent where the FBI is looking into credible claims of sexual assault amongst powerful Republicans.
Because hello.
It's a dangerous.
Right.
Yeah, so, he doesn't want to dip his toe in that.
Yeah, and we earlier in the week, we're like, he's showing some degree of restraint. That seems amazing. Well, let's see how long it lasts. But we said it. We said, hey, look, man, you got to call it as it is. That's restraint. He didn't attack her, right? And he said, well, we just want the facts. Like, somebody gave him that talking point, but he stuck with it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a really low bar to give Donald Trump a compliment like, hey, good job. You didn't viciously attack someone who alleged an attempted rape. But of course he couldn't hold it. Of course he couldn't.
Couldn't do it.
So today, blah, why didn't she do it? The part of the tweets that was most despicable, so questioning whether someone actually went through an experience, because they didn't have they didn't come forward when they were 15. She was scared to death, she said, that her parents would find out that she was drinking at that party and that she got herself in trouble. She's 15 years old at the time, etc. So that's all terrible enough. But did you notice the worst part of it? Or her loving parents comment? In other words, it's her parents' fault for not coming forward. They didn't even know about it. He's such a bad guy. He can't help but viciously attack people that are in any way in his way.
I think that comment actually went to her credibility as someone today as well. Even though, yes, he was attacking her parents for not knowing something they didn't know back then, or not doing something they couldn't know about to do back then. But I just think it was also super condescending. I mean, here is Dr. Ford. Here is someone who's actually come quite a long ways in life, right? And to kind of infantilize that in this tweet, I thought was like an additional extra Trumpian dig.
There's small words. I always look at details, because actually I was waiting for this for days. As you said, he's been holding it in. The only thing of the trifecta of she took too long to come forward, where was the police involved, all this stuff happening. The other part of this that he forgot to go with, which maybe it'll happen tomorrow, is, do you see her face? Do you see her body? Why would Judge Kavanaugh want anything to do with this girl? That's the only thing left in Trump's normal toolbox, is to talk about how she looks and why that's not a thing. Lastly, on that tweet, he goes, if this attack was as bad as she says. So that's kind of admitting that there could have been an attack, and it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
It was just as one of the supporters from the Judicial Watch Network, one of those, it was just some rough horseplay. So it was an attack, but it just wasn't that bad. So she's bringing this up, and all he did was just try to get in her pants.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just all that happened.
Yeah, let me just, my shade of difference on that is he's saying either it wasn't that bad, right? It was just rough horseplay, as the Judicial Crisis Network spokesperson said it, or it was really, or she's making it up, because if it was that bad, obviously you'd go report it to the police, because in his mind, remember, one of the things he's charged with, he was accused of, is while his pregnant wife was upstairs in the middle of an interview, he cornered a reporter, pressed her against the wall, and started fondling her. And you remember from the Access Hollywood tapes, he says, you just grab him by the genitalia. If you're powerful, there's nothing you can do about it. He views that as not bad,
Right.
right? He views like, hey, a stranger in an alleyway, I guess, as that's bad, and obviously you would go to the cops with that. Everything else, you just shut up about. As Prager said, Dennis Prager said earlier in the week, oh, people grab my mom's breasts all the time. They grab my wife's breasts, and they were empowered enough to say, knock it out.
Yeah. So I want to add just one more development today to this, because I think it needs to be acknowledged, and he's gotten into this, many of the other defenders of Kavanaugh have gotten into this. There is no one whose life story and choices and actions and communication are examined with more of a fine-tooth comb than survivors of sexual assault. And God help you if you are not the perfect victim who acts exactly the way they expect based on mythology they've created. If you don't, report it in the right way, at the right time, all of that. So they've been saying this whole time, she waited a really long time. It was a really long time ago. I just don't buy it. There's no evidence. Okay, well, we are finding out more now that we know about this, and reporters can look into it, about what was happening to her and her social group around that time. So the New York Times talked with an unnamed male friend of hers that said that after the summer of the alleged attack, Ford, then known as Chrissy Blasey, fell off the face of the earth socially. That's a quote. Then says, all I remember, this is the gentleman, all I remember is after my junior year thinking, where is she? She was the sort of person a lot of people paid attention to. She was a leader. She was great. I was like, where did she go? So I don't expect that that will actually convince anyone of anything if they already believe that she's a liar. But she is acting and has acted through the course of her life, up to and including her fears about what testifying next week could actually be like. She is acting exactly like the victim of sexual assault. And that behavior can come in many different forms. The idea that we should be picking apart her behavior to say, that's not how I would have acted if I had almost been raped, is utterly absurd, utterly insulting, and also leads to more women not being willing to come forward when they're attacked in similar ways.
So last thing here is Kellyanne Conway was on TV minutes before the tweet and said, there's no reason the president would attack her. What are you doing, Kellyanne? You should know better than that by now. You know that he's gonna have you go say that and then attack her the very next minute. And in this case, it was literal. It was minutes after she said that on TV, he sent the tweets.
Yeah.
And as we told you earlier in the live show, we will be covering the hearings if she's going to testify. We'll cover all of them at tyt.com/live, and we'll give our analysis on the spot as we cover it live. So don't miss that. And it's our wish, and as our poll showed on tyt.com/poll, 80% of you guys also want her to testify because we want to get at the truth. Okay, we got to take another break here, guys. When we come back, Rosenstein. This one is huge. We'll be right back.